Imagine walking out of prison with nothing but a few dollars in your pocket and nowhere to go. So the society has moved on, doors are shut, and the odds are stacked against you. But what if someone believed in you enough to give you a second chance? Today's guest knows all about second chances, not just giving them, but living them. From homelessness to business ownership, from rejection to award winning success, his journey is a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of never giving up. He is the father of Good Samaritan's Home, a nonprofit helping people rebuilding their lives after prison. He's also an award winning author whose novel, Running as Fast as I Can, has won over 30 literary awards. Welcome to another episode of Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. In this episode, I talk to John, the founder of Good Samaritan Home. John, welcome to the show.
Very glad to be here this morning, Ash. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you to that you would like to share with our audience?
It's actually a personal quote that it became our mantra for Good Samaritan Home. And actually, the theme of my novel is that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. As long as we keep running, we will fall down, but just get up again and keep running.
Indeed. I mean, I couldn't relate to it more because in Founder's Life, I don't even remember how many times I fell down and had to get up back and then, start walking again slowly. Cool. So tell us about Good Samaritan Home. What does the service do? Who is it for? And what's the main problem you're helping to solve?
The Good Samaritan Home is a nonprofit. I started that 24 years ago, but I was 53 years old. I had been through numerous careers, and I would say not too successful at them because I couldn't find my niche. And in fact, I had been homeless at one point and I was near homeless again. And what I was doing was my wife and I said, let's see if we can help people who are struggling as much or more than us. And
Mm,
so we found the oldest house in the community. It's all we could afford. And we
mm,
renovated it. It was 140 years old. And we made it into a homeless shelter.
mm.
And over time, we were asked to help men coming from prison who are homeless. And that became not just our focus, but it grew eventually to 19 houses. And we have helped 2,500 men and women restart their lives after prison. So
Wow.
I found my purpose in helping others who are struggling because of my struggles.
Wow. So would you would you mind sharing? Okay, let me put this question in a different way. I am eager to learn more about the person as you are. Can you take us back to your roots? Share with our listeners about your upbringing, your childhood. How did your early experiences shape your journey and eventually led you to where you are right now?
I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and many of your listeners probably are too young to know what that was like. But we grew up with the duck and cover drills in school where you were supposed to go under your desk and hide in case there was a nuclear attack, because we assumed that there would be an attack from Russia. And
Mm,
then we had the Kennedy assassination, and then we had the King assassination, we had the Kent State shootings, we had Watergate, we had all of those social disruptions that, in fact, I compare 1968 to the current political climate where there's constant threats of violence and acts of violence. And we grow up thinking that's normal.
mm,
So when I graduated from college, I had no direction. I had a degree in psychology, just didn't mean anything because you couldn't use it. And I probably took that degree thinking it would help me. And all it did was confirm that the whole world was crazy, not just me. So I ended up going. I was a truck driver. I was a fireman. I was a building home contractor. I was a journalist at one point. I was even a minister, thinking I could help in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But when you grow up without structure and without community support, when you grow up as we did in the 60s, isolated, and
Mm.
family structures were very different than they are today. I just didn't know. And like I said, I was homeless at one point and near homeless again with my family. So I have great sympathy for the people in today's culture where we don't know from day to day what's going to happen. And the truth is, I think it's probably as close to 1968 as I've ever seen. It's just that the stakes are higher. And I think that's why this message of hope that Good Samaritan offers is resonating beyond those coming from prison. I
Mm.
think we're all desperate to hear a message of hope and not the name calling that we're seeing so much of in politics today.
Yes.
How can we help one another? Not how can we pigeonhole and categorize and castigate one another.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've been on we've been on news channels looking at all what happened at White House yesterday or
Oh,
day before yesterday with Prime Minister from Ukraine, and then all the media is like left and right. Oh my God, I stopped watching news completely, to be honest. This is just like on the social media platforms which I've seen. But not this, diverting from our topic, because we are here to talk something about good growth and second chances today. What inspired you to start Good Samaritan? I mean, you mentioned that you got a old home in your local community, and then you helped around how many, 1,600 you said, or 2,500?
2,500 over the past 24
25
years, 2,500.
2,500
And
people. So is it like, I share that story when you were broke and homeless, and from there, how did you came to this point where you like started helping other people, and then we would like to go towards the direction where you wrote this book, and then it become got so many, literally, authorizations, prices, and
when I was single, I was living in my truck between jobs, and that I
mm,
met my wife, and we immediately developed a relationship where we spent our time talking, and our dating experience was we would sit up literally all night at the kitchen table and just talk. And I
mm,
think that's the reason we've been together for 47 years. We still do that today. And she helped me in every facet of Good Samaritan Home. In fact, I'm 76 and she's my age, but today she's painting and patching and fixing floors just like people half her age. So there's a
wow.
commitment, a shared commitment to not just Good Samaritan Home, but to helping people. And so we started off when after we were married, I'd say 30 years, and we were struggling, and we were about to lose our home because I had lost another job, and uh, that with children involved was probably much more desperate, and that's why it took a tremendous leap of faith to simply say, instead of giving up and quitting, how
Mm,
can we go back with our passion? And that's when we started, not just started Good Samaritan Home, but remodeling this house. And I promised my wife I'd have it remodeled in 3 months, and it took 14 years. so,
wow.
uh, but here's the thing: is all those detours or failed careers actually played into Good Samaritan Home. The
Mm,
construction background helped us remodel houses. The journalism background helped me communicate to the community. The ministry background helped me know how to talk to people who are in pain. So there's a lot of factors that I thought were failures
Mm,
actually were preparation. And that to me is a very good lesson. When you fall down, you actually may stand up stronger
mm,
than you were beforehand because that wound will actually make your bones stronger. And that's what
yeah.
happened with us. But we started off with just a homeless shelter in our own house.
Mm,
And the Department of Correction, I had been working with them as a volunteer, and a chaplain said, I have a man coming out of prison.
mm,
And you take him into your house because he's served his time. He's not a risk to the community, but he's homeless.
mm,
So we took him into our house and thinking that this was a very good thing for the community, we
mm,
wanted to share that story. And immediately, when word got out that we had a man in prison, from prison in our house, not just there were petitions, there were calls to the city council, there were heated meetings in public,
mm.
there were letters to the editor, there were threats, there were ordinances passed by the city council trying to block our efforts. There were
Wow.
even threats of violence, and I had police protection going to some of those meetings.
Mm,
And we eventually ended up suing the city several times to keep our house open.
wow.
But but I will say this, that we never responded with name calling. We never responded like you're seeing on the internet today or even on television today from our politicians. We tried to respond like John Lewis did from the civil rights movement.
Mm,
He said, no matter what somebody says to me, I always call them brother,
mm.
because if I don't, it will change me.
Yeah.
So I was steeped in the civil rights training, steeped in the Gandhian training, but actually applying it in our small town. We tried to do it in little ways like calling people brother, or even when it snowed, we would clean the entire block of every sidewalk without saying a word so that people would know that we were a good neighbor. Uh, our snow shovel spoke louder than anything we could say in public.
That's so inspiring, John. And you touched a very important aspect of the society when you mentioned like a lot of people started, you know, petitions against you, even though you were helping people. What's the biggest misconception people have about formerly incarcerated individuals?
Well, to be quite frank, we're in a rural community in Western Ohio, and
Mm,
it's 96% white. And there's a tendency to think, if you watch the news, that everyone arrested is black. So it
mm,
has to be a black city issue. And our first resident was black.
mm.
But here's what I found is that the majority of people in prison are white.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the majority of people are not those people, they are us people. And
Mm,
what changed everything was not just drugs, but heroin. Meth and heroin became so common in the rural areas that it was no longer those people. It was your nephew, it was your son, it was you.
mm,
And so we started getting referrals from the local court. And today, majority of the people in one of our houses here in town have all been people who should normally be in jail, but they are now referred to our house. And we calculate we've saved the local community $1 million in jail costs
wow.
because we don't charge for that. We we're compensated through our contract with the state of Ohio.
Got it. And is that true that in US, if you are in a prison, you work and then the money you get for that work is like 10x less than what you get outside?
I can't speak to all the policies in the prison, but I do not believe that you get paid anything, or if
Oh.
it's a minimal amount, because the attitude is that it costs $109 a day to house somebody in prison,
Hmm.
and you calculate that over 365 days a year times how many do we have in Ohio's prison? 50,000 men and women. So you're
Hmm.
talking billions of dollars. Now, I
Mm,
will say this, that Ohio has one of the most progressive plans and programs for rehabilitation. It's surprisingly progressive
mm,
for a red state. And what they do, they put a lot of emphasis on training and preparation. And so when you are released, you should never be released homeless. There should be some place that where you can get support. And one of those support systems is our house. It's called independent housing. And we have men and women who come and they are not charged and they can stay for a month, 2 months, up to a year. And we connect them with local resources like job and family services or
mm.
mental health counseling. And in our one house is in Dayton, which is the larger city. We there's a reentry coalition that the county will actually give job training, and our residents will go through that. And some men are getting a certificate to apply for a job that they are so proud of that training they've gotten that they will literally
Wow.
cry because this is the only award they've ever gotten in their life.
Oh my God.
Grown
That must
men,
be that
grown
must
men.
be very heart touching for you to change those life, right?
I had a man call me, and he must be 45 years old. He was the one that cried when he got the certificate. And
Mm,
then it took him several weeks to actually get a job. But when he got the job finally, he called me. He said, I got a job as a forklift driver. And he was crying on the phone. He was
wow.
so proud of himself. He said, I had to tell you first. That
Indeed.
to me is what it's all about.
Indeed. Indeed. Nothing else. Yeah, I totally agree. And take us to the journey when you started thinking about writing this novel, Running as Fast as I Can. What's the story behind that? I mean, I can see that you started helping people, and then you started helping community, not just the government, because you're saving a lot of money for them, but also trying to bring change in the society. But what triggered you to start writing this novel, and how did you make it so successful?
I'd always wanted to write a story. In fact,
Mm,
when I was, I think, 22, I sat down at a typewriter, a Royal typewriter, if you remember that.
mm,
There's no plug, no electricity, just a keyboard. And I started to write something, and I typed in a title, and then I stopped. I had nothing to say. So
mm,
I put it aside until I lived something to write about. And but what happened was, in the middle of all this conflict with the city, with all the people, with the threats, I even had some man once who tried to stab me in front of the courthouse. So there
wow.
was a lot of misunderstanding. So I would go to these meetings and I would take reams of data and I
Mm,
would try to show that we're saving money by doing this. I was trying to show that we can make people safer. In fact, I even did a 10-year research project for my doctorate that was I literally could prove that reentry programs benefit the community and the mentors.
mm,
And whenever I would present the data, you could hear the crickets. Nobody was listening to data.
mm,
So and then I realized it was about the time that the movie Titanic came out, and, and Titanic was extraordinarily popular. But if I were to ask you, what is the story of Titanic about? What's it come down to? It's a story about lifeboat safety.
yeah.
And nobody would watch a documentary about how to fix a lifeboat ready for a sinking ship. But
No.
you take Jack and you take Rose and a love story between two outsiders and
Mm,
bring them together on the Titanic, and you've got a blockbuster story. So
exactly.
I decided to write a story about a young boy named Daniel Robinson who grew up in an abusive poverty home where
Mm,
he didn't have the tools, and he spent his life like Forrest Gump going through the 60s and 70s trying to find love,
mm,
trying to find his Jenny. And that story became extremely emotional story of second chances. And for 10 years I wrote and rewrote and wrote it again. And at the end product, uh, I felt was the story that emotionally talked about what it means to be down and out and to need a second chance. And that's where the awards came from, because
Mm,
readers are connecting with that emotionally. And we're getting people who now understand not prison, but they understand second chances. Because I think every one of us like to think we're better than our mistakes. We want to try
mm.
one more time.
That is so inspiring, and you're absolutely correct, because when you start writing something, you know what you want to write about, and then you have nothing, because you need quite a lot of not just creative juice, but also this deep understanding of a particular topic which you could relate to a story. Better if it is your own, but then if someone else, then you've been part of it, or at least somebody who has added value to this character's life.
And I'll be quite candid with you. The first draft took me 3 years, and that was easy. You
Mm,
just write the story, just get it out, stream of consciousness. But to write a story well takes editing, and it took me 24 drafts, and in total 10 years. And I even hired an editor, and we worked and worked and worked, because you can get facts out, you can get information out, but how do you bring Jack and Rose into the story?
mm,
And that's what I had to do. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. But here's the funny part. I was reading a scene, just a little bit from the book yesterday with my wife,
mm,
and I found myself choking up because I was getting emotional over something I've read 1,000 times, but it still caught me emotionally. And I
mm,
think that's what the readers are saying. They couldn't put that down because they felt Daniel's story.
mm. Wow, that's really cool. um didn't you got rejected like more than, I don't know, 250 one to 300 times or something when
You
you
had to bring that up, didn't you?
no, this
Well,
is very important, because you see, this is a founders podcast. Rejection and receiving no's is a trophy in our world, isn't it?
I thought once you write a book, because you hear stories about, oh, I sent my book out to an agent, they loved it, and now
Mm,
it's on the New York Times bestseller list. I've found that that's a lot of crap.
mm,
It happens, but it's like saying I won the lottery. Uh,
yeah.
there are a million books published every year, and the vast, I mean, absolute 99.9% of them sell less than 250 copies.
Mm,
Most books are not profitable. So if
mm,
you send your manuscript, or even send your what you call your query, your introductory letter to an agent in New York, and in 30 seconds they look at what you spent 10 years writing, and they want to know, can I make money on this immediately?
mm,
And they're going to pass you off in 30 seconds. So I was rejected again and again and again, and every time I was rejected, I rewrote and re-edited and revisited the entire theme. What can I do better? And I never worked so hard at editing as I did at writing. And it was 200 rejections. And
wow.
eventually, now here's the hard part. I had an outsider story written by an outsider, and I was trying to get insider publishers to publish it, and it won't
Mm,
happen.
mm,
So what I ended up doing was I contacted my attorney, I contacted a publicist, and I formed my own publishing company called Don Quixote Press, because we tilt at windmills.
mm,
And that is exactly what happened. And so now, good, I under Don Quixote, not only have I published my book, but what happened is I've learned the publishing business, and I have the passion for this work. And now I can publish other outsider stories. And I'm working on the
mm,
sequel now. But here's the best part, Ash. We are planning an anthology of short stories that are written by men in prison, that have they we're going to go into the prison and teach them how to write a short story. And that
mm,
short story will be now published after a year's worth of editing. by Don Quixote Press. So none of that, none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for those rejections. And that to me is the greatest lesson of all.
That is amazing, because that tells that being consistent and keep trying actually gets you to the place where you wanna. And how can I forget to say, like, you got appreciation and feedback, like truly a masterpiece. You got American Writing Award,
Yeah,
general fiction winner. You got Story Trade debut book of the year. You got Independent Author Award for social political change,
yeah.
Best Book Award for inspirational fiction, Hawthorne Prize for fiction. Oh my God, that's like American Fiction Awards. There's like list of awards you got for this story. But the thing to learn from here is the book was not ready at its first draft. You kept going and going and going with several iterations to get you all these awards and become a bestseller in your niche.
The whole idea of rejections, the whole idea of failure, is that that's where you develop the calloused hands and most of all the tender heart. And
Mm,
those are the elements I believe that make a business and particularly a nonprofit successful. Because I could make Good Samaritan Home profitable, but to make it effective, to make it compassionate, to actually make a difference in somebody's life, uh, you can't do that in theory. You have to come from your own failures. And almost all of my staff have either been in prison or have been in all sorts of desperate situations. So they understand firsthand what it is to fail.
mm, mm. Would you mind sharing a compelling story about, or a case study, that highlights how
Hmm.
an individual have, you know came to you, came to Good Samaritan's Home, um, and then potentially you help that individual to get from A to B, where B is so successful in societal values that it's a good example for others.
Sometimes on television, you'll see a documentary about somebody who was in prison and they were exonerated, and then they became very successful, and
Mm,
they became an attorney, for example, and
yeah.
that happens. But most people that we deal with, what led people to prison was either birth or
Mm,
circumstance. They were
mm,
born into poverty, they were born into abuse, they made wrong choices, they lack education. There's a myriad of issues. And the
mm.
best example of that is Jimmy. He grew up in an abusive situation, went
Okay.
to the Navy when he was 17 years old, did his 2 years, but because he had mental health issues, he washed out. And he spent the rest of his life struggling with schizophrenia. And he was in and out of homelessness
Mm,
and in and out of prison. And when the trouble with schizophrenia is that you say and do things that you may or may not know you're doing,
mm,
and you're still accountable for that. So Jimmy spent his whole life in and out.
mm.
And so he came to us when he was 67 years old.
Wow.
He was found in his truck, freezing to death in the middle of winter. The truck was broken down. And because he had been in the Navy, the VA hospital picked him up and they said, "We will guarantee his medication for his schizophrenia if you will offer him housing."
Mm,
So we took Jimmy in for a week and then a month, and he stayed for a year.
mm,
And Jimmy stayed with us because we could control and direct his not just his hospital visits, but we his Social Security checks would always disappear the first of the month, and so
mm,
we were able to support him financially and to have a payee guard his money.
mm.
Jimmy stayed with us 14 years,
My
and
God.
when he died last year at age 81, what he said to us was, "This was the only home I ever had."
Wow.
And Jimmy was probably notorious in town for his erratic behavior. He was known to jump out of windows when he was off his medication.
Wow.
And Jimmy actually, at one point, he said to my wife and I love you guys." So that to me, I still talk about Jimmy.
Yeah, yeah. And why not? This is like the best part of your job is you don't get paid, you don't, I mean, you get paid, but you don't get enough paid to make a, luxury life. You don't get so much power doing what you're doing. What you get is love. That is your wealth.
And we like to think that everybody will say, "Oh, thank you for this opportunity," and they turn their life around. But the
Mm,
truth is, some people like Jimmy will get it. Maybe most of the guys will not get it today, but
mm,
they will remember that for a time somebody tried to help them. And what we're doing, we're watering, and
mm,
we may not see the crop grow, but at least we planted a seed, we added a little water, and maybe someday that crop will grow.
mm. Indeed, indeed. Yeah, no doubt about that. So yeah, amazing. So John, we have talked about your journey about Home Samaritan. We talked about your book. How did you manage to, get that to so many people? Uh, you have talked about your personal journey. Would it be would it be a good idea for you to talk about a little bit about the big picture? What's the next goal you're working towards with what you have achieved till now? Because I think that's very important for our listeners to hear about.
Obviously, what I'm doing now, that I'm training my staff. We have 10 people that work for Good Samaritan Home. And
Mm,
so uh, I can train them to do the work. I can
mm,
train them to do the requirements that are to dealing with people who are on parole. But what
mm,
I can't teach them that readily is to have compassion, to have
mm,
mercy, because when you're dealing with somebody coming from prison, you have so much power. It's very easy to say, "You messed up, you have to leave."
yeah.
And what we're trying to teach my staff is they should leave, they deserve to leave, but how can we get them to stay one more time? And that's what they're getting. And that, if I can get the staff to carry on with what I consider to be the heart of Good Samaritan Home, then I
Mm,
know it will live beyond me. And and then what I'm hoping with this book and with the other books that we want to publish is that they will live well beyond Good Samaritan Home, because the idea of a second chance story like Titanic will motivate other people to, particularly in this punitive tribal climate we live in. If I can encourage somebody to offer a second chance to a Republican or a Democrat or a libertarian or somebody who has no party, if
mm,
we can look beyond color, if we can see people and offer people a second chance, then my life will not be in vain. I believe that.
mm. Now that's a very, how do I say it? Very thought provoking, but a very, you know,
Well, it sounds simplistic, and it's almost like what we call a hug a thug program, but it really isn't.
mm,
It's the idea that you don't do something big by doing something big. You do something big by doing something small. Uh, I have a neighbor who's got all sorts of stuff on his porch,
mm,
garbage and stuff. Obviously, they're having issues in the house. So it looks like somebody's moving out. So I dropped by and I said, "Do you need help moving your stuff?"
mm,
And what he told me, that he unloaded his story about his son, etc. And I said, "If you need help, let us know. We'll be glad to help you." And
mm,
that's a small thing. And maybe he won't ask me, but I offered.
mm.
And that to me is that's how you help relieve somebody's suffering, is sometimes just offering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm enjoying this conversation so much, John. Because I'm learning, fundamentals of life from you. But we are limited time. So what I do is with my guest, I share this. this clip art which I keep scribbling when we are talking. It's kind of like a summary of what we have talked
Mm.
about, and then once it is done, we move towards our lightning round. So what we have talked about is you started your journey early in the age. You did quite a lot of different roles. You've been a truck driver, you've been a fireman, you've been a journalist, you even been a minister during your journey. While you were on these different roles, you met a beautiful lady with whom you actually shared your life, and once you lived in a truck, right?
Yeah.
With her, and that's so nice of her that she continued with you in this situation. And then life took you towards the next step where you managed to get a house, and then you started helping people, helping to solve the housing problem for people who are coming out of prison. And one of the examples you shared about a gentleman who came out of a prison, and then you wanted to take him in, but then that didn't go well with the local community. People started, putting petition against you. You even had security details around you to protect you while you're going out and doing things. But then ultimately you secured, you helped the person, and then end up making you help more than 2,500 people during this journey. And then you also shared that it took you 10 years to not just write, but refine your book multiple times, and then get to the point where after 200 rejections, you finally hit the spot where you got the bestseller book, which got, you know, dozens of awards across the globe. And now, considering what you're doing with helping other people like you did with Jimmy, most of the people who get into this kind of lifestyle is because of their birth or the circumstances they're going through. But you kind of, explain the example. What you helped out Jimmy with is you took him in and took care of his whole housing issues, but also medication, guarding his money, etc., etc. And then your next goal is to train your staff so that they can be more empathetic, sympathetic with the
Yeah.
people who are coming in, and then could go and then continue the Good Samaritan Home legacy. Is that everything which we discussed today? Is there anything I missed or something you would like?
No, actually, it's quite a good drawing. Yeah, you should consider art as a career.
Yeah, this is something I do for my, like, niece and my
Actually,
nephews.
seeing the diagram of my life, I shake my head because uh, it's been quite a ride. That's all I can say.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I mean, this is one of the very nice journeys I have driven on my show, talking with people. And I see that, there's not a lot of numbers here, but there's a lot of love in this drawing, to add to the community. So thank you very much, John. So let's go back to our conversation and talk about and get into our lightning round. So we have this lightning round where we ask our guest about 6 quick fire questions. So you don't necessarily have to answer all of them, but if you want to, you can answer them as quickly as possible. Are you ready?
Let's give it a try. I'll do my
Let's
best.
let's give it a try. Great. Number one, what are the top 3 strategies for writers in 2025 to get to write the books in a way that they get the most amount of traction?
I would say tell a story that's meaningful to you. Don't tell
Hmm.
a story that's popular. Just let your passion come out. Let your emotions come out. Don't give me facts. Give me your heart. And
Hmm.
start writing. Just write.
Hmm. Hmm. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
Well, there's a couple options. I would recommend reading classics like Somerset Maugham wrote Of Human Bondage, which has been
Hmm.
around for 100 years. It's not what I call an easy read, but it's much easier than many classics. Uh,
Hmm.
but also, I would recommend reading a lot of fun books like John Grisham. I
Mm,
like Kristen Hanna because she tells a good story.
mm,
So, ironically, Of Human Bondage is a rough outline of my book. I used this idea that Somerset Maugham used and I applied it to my character. But then again, Forrest Gump can be used as a model. So,
mm.
read everything, keep reading.
Keep reading. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Uh, Number one, there's a thousand reasons why it won't work. We started with no money. We had sweat equity. And then in the middle of all the conflict, we actually determined to buy another house and another house to prove to ourselves that we were not going to quit. So you have to have a great deal of faith in your vision, and also you have to have a great deal of resilience because you will be hit with rejections and in some cases even legal issues. So
Mm,
never quit trying.
got it. Great stuff. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Uh, well, I get up in the morning, I do my stretching and my exercises, and I try when possible to walk 5 miles a day. And it's not just for my physical health; those things clear my mind. And a lot of times I'll be walking, and I'll get an idea of something I've been writing, and I'll write a note on the phone while I'm walking, and it will all become very clear. So keep active and read. I read the newspapers constantly. I'm looking for what's going on. So uh, I have more questions than I have answers, and that
Hmm.
often leads in directions I never envisioned.
Interesting. Interesting. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Oh, wow, wow. I've had a lot of crazy ideas. I can tell you about how I wanted to build a house without a job. And my wife said, no, over my dead body, cowboy. Uh, I would say that most ideas that you come up with initially are bad ideas
Hmm.
because they're just a start. It's like you have to be thinking. So I've probably had 1,000 ideas, and most of them didn't work out, but they were preparation. So don't be afraid to at least on paper. Here, the perfect example. When I was young and single, I was going to start a mobile tune up service because I thought it was important to go to somebody's house to fix their car to tune it. But I didn't know how to tune up cars. The idea was great. I had no money, I had no skills, but the idea luckily never went anywhere because it would have bankrupted me. But it was the idea of trying something innovative that eventually led to where we are today.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 And what's an interesting or a fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Hmm. I I have a warped sense of humor, and what I like to do I try not to get into Facebook comments where you name call, but what I like to do is say something that is left-handed. So you have to say, is he kidding or is he serious? And the idea is to get people talking,
Hmm.
and I don't like to to slap people with something that's obviously a joke. But if you do it with a quirk in your eye, uh, get people thinking. That's
Get
that's what
people thinking.
Facebook can do if it would.
Mm, mm, mm. Well, a lot of thought provoking food you gave to my brain today, John. Thank you so much. And I think our listeners must have enjoyed this episode because it was so deep. So, thank you again. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking
My
years and
pleasure. You've
years.
you've made my day on a. I think it's a Monday. It's a gray Monday.
Great. If people want to check out Good Samaritan Home or if they want to get in touch with John Graham, what's the best way to do it?
Best way, it's very simple. Go to johndavidgraham.com. That's my website. And you could link to Good Samaritan Home. You can link to Amazon. And I'm not looking for solicitations or anything like that. But if you go to Amazon, you can download several free chapters of the book and just check it out for yourself. And if you
Mm,
like it, then buy it. But what I really want people to do is to start talking about the issues of homelessness, of abuse, of drug addiction, of second chances. And
mm,
particularly in this day and age, if we don't talk about these things, we're going to revert to our tribes, and we're going to attack one another instead of support one another. And I'm hoping that by reading this book, it might be a first step to dialogue.
mm, mm. Interesting. John, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing with Good Samaritan Home. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on
Oh,
Founders Podcast.
you've made my day, brother. You really have. I think I can go out and handle the weather a little longer today here in Ohio.
Great stuff. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with John, insightful and inspiring. If you want to get in touch with John, just go to johndavidgraham.com or potentially go to the Amazon link, which I'll be putting it into the description later on for you to check out the book. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated on our future interviews with proven founders and industry experts like John. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.